Hey everyone, I'd like to share with you three very common exegetical fallacies. The first one is this: allegorizing scripture without regard for original intent. Allegorical meaning is figurative and representative in nature. Now, this is one of the most abused methods of interpreting scripture, and it was actually pretty common in the early church. But it's dangerous because it allows a teacher or a preacher to introduce his or her own ideas to the text. For example, Old Testament references to Babylon are not modern day references to the institutionalized church. The same allegorical misrepresentation has been associated with the city of Jerusalem, where some have suggested that Jerusalem represents the corporate church of today. Oh, and I'd like to add one more to that. The characters in the parable of the Good Samaritan are not fallen Adam, Christ, the law, and the prophets. They are who Jesus said they are, and not who we want them to be. So allegorical methods are not encouraged because they tend to ignore the original intent of the authors of Scripture. So C.S. Lewis and John Bunyan are able to pull it off pretty nicely in their books, but allegorical interpretations are probably not the best way to go when we're interpreting Scripture. The second common exegetical fallacy is blind selectivity. With blind selectivity, we get to choose which portions of Scripture we would like to focus on and which ones we choose to ignore. So, in other words, we gravitate to some and not to others. With that, I intentionally blind myself to portions of Scripture that might cause me to think differently. I was reminded at a conference that I recently attended that the sum total of the Bible is true, and not just the parts I like, and not just the parts you like. So we need to be listening to the whole of Scripture and guard against blind selectivity. The third exegetical fallacy is over-spiritualizing the text. Over-spiritualizing occurs when we stretch the meaning of the text to address spiritual issues that happen to be present in our own setting. For example, if I preach from the Old Testament where Solomon built the temple and used that to justify the need for a new church building, then maybe, just maybe, I've overextended the meaning of that particular passage from 2 Chronicles. A similar abuse occurs when we over-spiritualize David's battles with Goliath to say that we're facing insurmountable odds, or we're up against some incredible challenges in our life. And then one of my favorites is when we use the shrinking size of Gideon's army to justify people leaving the church or lower church attendance. And the list of over-spiritualizations goes on and on and on. So how do we avoid over-spiritualizing? We pay closer attention to the context, because context determines meaning. So there you have it, folks. Dr. Bob's personal pet peeves, three very common exegetical fallacies.